King Charles has named his youngest brother, Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, a title held, of course, by his late father, Prince Philip, for more than 70 years. It had been the late Prince's wish for Prince Edward to be granted the dukedom after his death. Buckingham Palace announced the new Duke of Edinburgh.
When the secret finally broke, the royal world was stunned. Prince Edward, long overshadowed by his older siblings, had inherited one of Queen Elizabeth's most private and carefully guarded estates, a treasure hidden for decades, untouched by public eyes, and protected by layers of sealed legal trusts. While Edward quietly stepped into his new role, whispers erupted in palace corridors. Queen Camilla and her son Tom, once hopeful for control, were furious. What was meant to safeguard legacy became the flashpoint of ambition, power, and unspoken family rivalry. The announcement that shocked the palace. In the opening months of 2026, a decision quietly made its way through the royal family, subtle in appearance but enormous in consequence. At first, it might have seemed ordinary, barely worth notice to the outside world. Yet behind the palace walls, whispers spread, eyebrows rose, and hushed conversations revealed the truth. This understated choice would shape family dynamics, influence power, and leave ripples that would be felt for years to come. Prince Edward, often the overlooked younger brother, the one cast in the shadow of his more prominent siblings, suddenly found himself the focus of attention. Not Prince William, not any of the senior heirs who had spent decades being groomed for legacy, duty, and the weighty expectations of monarchy. It was Edward, the unassuming prince, who inherited one of Queen Elizabeth II's most secret and closely guarded private estates. The announcement, though quietly made, sent immediate shockwaves through the family. At first there was disbelief. Surely someone must have made a mistake. Edward, of all people? The very idea seemed almost impossible, like a carefully set chessboard, upended in a single, sweeping move. Yet there it was, the reality staring them in the face. Inside the private chambers of the palace, the atmosphere shifted almost instantly. Conversations, once polite and measured, became laced with tension. Brows furrowed, whispers turned into pointed questions, and the usual calm veneer of royal composure began to crack. This wasn't just a minor adjustment of assets. It was a subtle, yet seismic disruption of decades-long plans. Those closest to the matter, trusted aides, counselors, and members of the inner circle, watched carefully as reactions unfolded. Some were quietly pleased, seeing Edward finally receive recognition he had long been denied. Others were unsettled, uneasy at how this new distribution could ripple through family dynamics, alliances, and expectations. The delicate balance of duty, inheritance, and influence within the monarchy was suddenly in flux. For Edward himself, the moment was both thrilling and daunting. Here was an opportunity few could imagine, a responsibility few would envy. He would be tasked not only with the stewardship of a historically significant estate, but also with navigating the subtle politics of a family unaccustomed to surprises. Every decision, every gesture, every public appearance would now be weighed against an invisible scale of legacy and expectation. And so, a quiet decision made perhaps with thoughtfulness, perhaps with daring, changed everything. In the halls where tradition reigned supreme, the unexpected had arrived. Plans that seemed untouchable, designed to unfold over generations, had been challenged in a single, irreversible moment. In that instant, Edward was no longer the background figure. He had become a pivotal player in a story that was only just beginning to unfold. In an unexpected move, Prince Edward reportedly inherited one of Queen Elizabeth's private estates. But why was Edward chosen for such a rare honor? Could there be something remarkable about him that made him the Queen's chosen beneficiary? Now let's uncover how the overlooked prince won the Queen's ultimate trust. Edward's quiet power. The decision raised eyebrows, and not just a few. It stirred whispers that traveled through palace corridors and private salons alike. Why Edward? It seemed almost unthinkable. Throughout his life, he had never been at the very center of royal power. He wasn't the heir who commanded public attention, nor the one whose actions were dissected in every headline. He was, in the eyes of many, the background figure, the prince, who quietly observed, who moved with care, and who rarely thrust himself into the spotlight. And yet, perhaps that was exactly why the Queen had chosen him. In a family where visibility often equaled influence, Edward had spent his years cultivating something far less obvious but far more valuable: reliability. He had a reputation for avoiding unnecessary drama, for performing his duties without the need for applause or recognition. Where others sought to shine, Edward had learned to serve in silence. Where others demanded to be seen, he preferred to be trusted. While senior royals carried their titles with ceremony, Edward carried trust quietly. His presence was steady, unflashy, and, in the private eye of the monarchy, profoundly dependable. Every small task he completed, every responsibility he undertook, was executed with a careful thoughtfulness that rarely drew attention but always produced results. It was a patience, a restraint, and an integrity that often went unnoticed in public but did not escape those who truly understood the machinery of the royal family. The Queen, in making her choice, had not been swayed by ambition, fame, or the clamor of public expectation. She had looked deeper, past the glitter of titles and the allure of tradition, to see the quality that mattered most when stewardship was at stake: trustworthiness. Edward's ability to act without ego, to navigate the subtleties of palace life without creating upheaval, had made him the perfect candidate for the responsibility she was passing on. What many dismissed as an odd decision would soon reveal itself as quietly strategic. In a world where power often clashed with personality, where legacy could be undermined by attention-seeking behavior, Edward's calm steadiness was an asset that could not be underestimated. It was this very difference, the quiet strength, the unassuming loyalty, that would prove decisive in ways no one had anticipated. In a family defined by visibility and ceremony, the unexpected choice of a prince who preferred shadows over spotlights was more than unusual. It was revolutionary, and it would not take long before that quiet, measured reliability reshaped the course of royal affairs, proving that sometimes the softest footsteps leave the deepest marks. Unlike others who are often defined by the power and visibility surrounding the royal family, Edward remained largely invisible. But could that very invisibility be why his mother considered him worthy of the estate trust? And might not having a demanding royal role give him the space to honor and preserve the Queen's carefully planned legacy? Let's find out. The prince no one was watching. For most of his life, Prince Edward had lived largely outside the glare of the relentless spotlight that followed his older siblings. While headlines chased every move of William and Harry, Edward moved quietly through life, observing, learning, and carving his own path away from public scrutiny. He was not molded by the same crushing weight of constant expectation that shaped the eldest heirs. This freedom, rare within the royal family, gave him space to think deeply, to explore his own interests, and even to dream boldly in ways that others might have dismissed as impossible. As a young boy, Edward once confided in Neil Armstrong, the legendary astronaut, that he wanted to journey into space himself. It was the kind of imaginative ambition that spoke to his curiosity and his willingness to see beyond the confines of tradition. He wasn't driven by the pursuit of power, titles, or recognition. Instead, he was quietly curious about the world and about himself. While others were busy performing for the public or navigating the pressures of royal expectation, Edward learned patience, reflection, and discretion. His life outside the spotlight didn't make him lesser. It made him different. He became someone who understood the value of observation, who could weigh choices carefully, and who could act without the need for approval or applause. This distance from constant scrutiny allowed him to develop a calm clarity, a steadiness that was rare in a family where appearances often mattered more than substance. In private, he listened more than he spoke. He absorbed more than he displayed. Perhaps it was this very quality that made Queen Elizabeth II place her trust in Prince Edward for responsibilities many assumed would go to his older siblings. Edward never sought attention, influence, or public acclaim. Instead, he quietly grew into a man defined by authenticity, steadiness, and thoughtful judgment. He understood that true authority is measured not by ceremony or spectacle, but by care, patience, and respect for those affected. He learned the delicate balance of family dynamics, the responsibility behind every choice, and the remarkable, often unseen power of discretion, a rare gift in a world driven by visibility. It was in this combination of independence, imagination, and grounded reliability that Edward found his unexpected strength. While others measured their lives by public perception and ambition, he measured his by character and quiet judgment. And when the moment came for the Queen to entrust someone with one of her most secret estates, it was this unique blend of qualities nurtured in the shadows, honed through thoughtful living, that made Edward the natural, if surprising, choice. In a world driven by visibility and acclaim, sometimes the person who stands in the shadows is the one most capable of carrying real power. Beyond the Queen entrusting her estate to her youngest son, did everyone in the royal family agree with this decision? And who could possibly go against the Queen's will? Now, let's explore the tensions stirred by Edward's unexpected inheritance. The fury behind palace doors. While the world outside consumed headlines and whispered about Prince Edward's surprising inheritance, an entirely different story was playing out behind the palace's grand gilded walls. To the public, it seemed like a simple, almost ceremonial announcement, but inside, the news rippled through the family like a silent shockwave. Long-held ambitions wavered, carefully nurtured expectations crumbled, and plans that had been considered unshakable suddenly teetered on the edge. In that quiet, tense atmosphere, loyalties were tested, strategies reconsidered, and the true weight of inheritance became impossible to ignore. Queen Camilla and her son, Tom Parker Bowles, had long nurtured an interest in the royal estates, imagining the potential they held, not just as historical treasures, but as opportunities to shape influence, legacy, and even personal ambitions within the monarchy. For years, ideas had been discussed in hushed conversations, plans had been sketched, possibilities explored, and dreams quietly nurtured. They had envisioned futures where their guidance, oversight, or creative vision might steer the estates toward new purposes, preserving their mark on the royal landscape. Edward's inheritance, however, changed everything. What seemed, to the public, like a routine transfer of property became, within the palace, a decisive shift in power and opportunity. It wasn't simply a matter of who held the title or signed the documents, it was about control, influence, and the closure of doors that some had hoped would remain open. The quiet assumptions and tentative plans that had taken shape over the years were suddenly swept aside, leaving frustrations simmering in the halls where protocol usually maintained calm. Inside the private rooms, expressions tightened, and conversations grew sharper. Those who had once imagined guiding the future of the estates found themselves sidelined, watching as Edward, previously overlooked and underestimated, became the unexpected custodian of a legacy they had quietly hoped to shape. Every decision he now made could redefine the trajectory they had once envisioned, and the realization sparked a subtle but unmistakable tension. Frustration in this context was not explosive. It was slow, methodical, the kind that seeps into daily interactions and reshapes relationships without anyone needing to raise their voice. Behind polished smiles and ceremonial greetings, nerves were tested. Ambitions that had seemed secure were now uncertain. The palace, a place built on centuries of hierarchy and careful order, suddenly felt a little less predictable. In essence, Edward's inheritance did more than transfer property. It disrupted expectations, challenged long-held assumptions, and quietly reshaped the internal landscape of the royal family. The public saw the headlines, but behind the scenes, the real story was unfolding. A story of frustration, recalculated plans, and the delicate art of navigating power in a world where tradition and surprise often collide in ways no one could foresee. Camilla and her son, Tom, had long shown interest in the estate that was ultimately given to Edward. But what makes this estate so valuable that anyone would have desired to inherit it? And what features set it apart from other royal properties? Now let's dive into the stakes behind the gates. Royal estates and a clash of vision. Behind the polished walls and golden gates of the palace, quiet conversations had been gaining momentum. Certain royal properties, historic, prestigious, and steeped in tradition, had sparked new ideas among members of the family and their closest advisors. The discussions were no longer about mere upkeep or preservation. Instead, some saw these estates as untapped opportunities, spaces that could be transformed into modern ventures, offering luxury experiences for discerning guests, exclusive cultural retreats, and high-end branding possibilities that might blend heritage with contemporary allure. For many, this approach represented evolution. It was a chance to bring the monarchy into the 21st century in a way that felt relevant, profitable, and even visionary. By turning these estates into destinations and experiences, the royal family could generate funds, extend influence, and craft a legacy that married tradition with innovation. From curated art exhibitions to lavish retreats and premium cultural events, the potential seemed limitless, offering a pathway to modernize without abandoning history. But not everyone saw it that way. To some members of the family, the very idea of reimagining centuries-old properties for commercial purposes felt like crossing a line. Heritage, they believed, was not a product to be packaged and sold. The estates were living monuments to the monarchy's history, carrying the weight of generations, and transforming them into luxury ventures risked undermining the very essence of what made them sacred. Tradition, in their eyes, was not meant to bend for opportunity, and the thought of opening doors to modern commerce stirred quiet unease, if not outright resistance. Yet amid these competing visions and debates, there was a reality that few had paused to consider. Those plans, no matter how detailed or well-intentioned, were already too late. The decisive actions of the Queen, quietly finalized behind closed doors, had already determined the path of ownership. Properties that had been envisioned as future playgrounds for innovation now belonged to Prince Edward, whose steadiness, discretion, and careful judgment meant that any major reimagining would require his approval first. The window for influence, for reshaping these estates according to personal ambition or modern trends, had quietly closed. The lesson was subtle, but profound. In the palace, timing, discretion, and foresight often mattered far more than vision alone. Opportunities that seemed within reach could vanish with a single decision. Plans that felt inevitable could be rendered moot by the quiet hand of someone who chose patience and loyalty over spectacle. And as Edward assumed stewardship, the family and the palace itself began to realize that the era of unchecked experimentation with royal assets had shifted. The future, for better or worse, would now unfold under his measured guidance. Beyond being a valuable gift that anyone would have been honored to receive from the Queen, what plans did she put in place to ensure this prized estate could not be taken from Edward? Could there have been a legal safeguard to guarantee her wishes were fully respected? Now, let's unravel the covenant that secured Edward's inheritance. A Queen's quiet preparation. Years before the headlines and whispers reached the public, Queen Elizabeth II had quietly prepared for a moment that many could never have predicted. Behind the stately walls of her private chambers, amid the centuries of royal tradition and careful planning, she had taken deliberate steps to ensure that one of her most treasured estates would pass exactly as she intended. It was not a decision made lightly, nor was it one that relied on chance. Every detail had been carefully considered, every safeguard meticulously put in place. In 2020, she established a sealed covenant trust, an instrument designed to be both precise and unassailable. Through this legal mechanism, she guaranteed that the estate would pass directly and fully to Prince Edward. There would be no shared control, no divided authority, and no opportunity for intervention or reversal. On paper, it was elegantly simple, a clear directive that spelled out ownership in unambiguous terms. But beneath that simplicity lay something far more formidable: absolute certainty. The covenant was not just a formality, it was a statement of intent and trust. It reflected the Queen's understanding of Edward's unique qualities, his discretion, reliability, and steadfastness, and her confidence that he alone could steward the estate responsibly. Unlike other decisions that could be influenced, debated, or overturned, this was final. Once activated, the trust could not be undone. It was a quiet but powerful declaration that, in matters of this private legacy, the Queen's wishes were absolute. Within the palace, those who understood the significance of the covenant recognized its weight immediately. It was more than a legal document. It was a signal of authority, foresight, and unshakable planning. Any hopes of shared management, any visions of influencing the estate for other purposes were now impossible. The timing of its activation was decisive, a move that quietly yet irrevocably shifted the balance of responsibility and power within the royal family. For Edward, the implications were profound. The trust gave him control not just over property, but over decisions, direction, and the legacy of generations before him. It marked him as a custodian chosen with intention, a steward entrusted with rare confidence. And for the family, the realization that the covenant was absolute introduced a tension that was subtle, yet undeniable. Plans once imagined were now impossible, and ambitions had to be recalibrated. In the end, what looked simple on paper was, in practice, an instrument of extraordinary precision and authority. The Queen had acted quietly, decisively, and with remarkable clarity. Through that covenant trust, she ensured that when the time came, Edward would inherit not just an estate, but a responsibility shaped and sealed by foresight, trust, and the kind of certainty only a monarch of her experience could achieve. Queen Elizabeth not only passed the estate to Edward, but also ensured it was legally secured in his favor. What could have earned Edward the Queen's trust to such an extraordinary degree? And what qualities make Edward stand out among the other members of the royal family? Now, let's explore a steady hand in a world of royal storms. A life of quiet stability. Prince Edward's life followed a path far steadier than most people imagined. While his older siblings were constantly under the glare of media scrutiny, their every move dissected and debated, Edward chose a different rhythm, one marked by calm, quiet, and thoughtfulness. His days were not dictated by the headlines or the pressures that often define royal life. Instead, he sought a life measured in trust, loyalty, and consistency, carving out a world where family and duty could exist in balance rather than spectacle. Together with Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, Edward built a strong private family life that became a sanctuary from the constant noise of public attention. Their home was a place where laughter, learning, and love took precedence over appearances, where their children could grow with stability and normalcy despite their unusual circumstances. Edward's approach to parenting was thoughtful, careful, and grounded, reflecting a man who understood that real influence often comes from what you do quietly, not what you display publicly. In a royal family frequently swept up in drama, controversy, and the relentless pursuit of image, Edward's calm and measured demeanor was striking. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't meant to make headlines, but it was dependable. And in a world where loyalty and steadiness are rare, that reliability carried immense weight. His life offered a quiet contrast to the chaos that sometimes surrounded the monarchy, a reminder that the work of sustaining a legacy often happens behind closed doors, away from the cameras, away from public judgment. Edward's calm and steady nature went far beyond his private family life. Whether he was attending royal engagements, quietly supporting charitable causes, or carrying out the behind-the-scenes duties that rarely make headlines, he approached every task with deliberate care and thoughtful attention. His unshakable consistency, discretion, and reliability earned him a rare kind of trust, the kind that mattered deeply to Queen Elizabeth II and those who understood the palace's inner workings. There was no need for grand gestures or public applause. His strength lay in quiet endurance, in the ability to be counted on without question, and it was this steadfastness that ultimately set him apart. In many ways, Edward's life exemplified a different kind of strength, one that comes not from the flash of public acclaim or the allure of headlines, but from quiet perseverance, careful judgment, and unwavering dedication. His calm presence, steady values, and private devotion to family shaped him into a prince who could be relied upon when the stakes were highest. And in a world where spectacle often overshadows substance, Edward's dependable, grounded approach proved that true power sometimes lies not in what the world sees, but in the steady hands that guide it from behind the scenes. Edward's lifestyle, free from controversy, earned him the Queen's trust to such an extent that he was entrusted with one of her estates. But which estate was given to Edward, and what legacy is tied to it? Now, let's uncover the hidden estate with an untold past. A royal estate revealed. It was only after the decision became public that the true story of the estate began to surface, layer by layer, like a secret long held beneath polished palace floors. For decades, its existence had been quietly tucked away from the public eye, shrouded in discretion and careful preservation. Few knew its full history, fewer still understood its significance. To the outside world, it was simply a headline, a name in a legal transfer. But behind the walls and gardens, the estate carried decades of untold history, a narrative shaped by purpose rather than display. Originally acquired during the turbulent years of World War II by King George VI, the property had been chosen not for grandeur or spectacle, but for its strategic and private value. It was a sanctuary, a carefully selected haven where the monarchy could act without the glare of public scrutiny. In an era of uncertainty and upheaval, it offered security, discretion, and the freedom to make decisions in quiet reflection. Over time, it became a hidden jewel of the royal portfolio, maintained with meticulous care, yet intentionally kept out of the limelight. There were no announcements, no public fanfare, no media coverage, just silence. Within its walls, generations of royals had moved and lived, making use of the estate's resources, yet never seeking recognition for doing so. Its rooms, gardens, and corridors bore witness to private moments, careful planning, and the subtle rhythms of life behind a crown. Every corner reflected thoughtful stewardship, a commitment to purpose over publicity. Unlike other estates that dazzled the public or were pressed into service as symbols of power, this one existed for function, not fashion, for strategy, not show. The moment the inheritance was made official, a secret kept for decades finally stepped into the light. The world began to see that this was no ordinary estate. It was more than land, more than historic buildings. It was a testament to foresight, careful planning, and deep trust. Queen Elizabeth had chosen not just a beneficiary, but a guardian. Prince Edward, quietly steady, measured, and trusted, was given something never meant for public display or acclaim. Every hidden hallway, every untouched room, and every silent record reflected the weight of responsibility now resting in his hands. This was legacy in its purest form, passed with intention and care. In revealing it, the monarchy reminded the world that not every crown asset exists for admiration. Some hold their value in secrecy, some in utility, some in the knowledge that the greatest treasures are preserved not for the eyes of the public, but for the careful hands of those deemed worthy. And as Edward assumed stewardship, the estate's true purpose, its history, its intent, and its significance finally began to unfold in a way the world could now begin to understand. Beyond its historical connection to King George VI, what other features make the estate given to Edward truly exceptional and worthy of ownership? Let's uncover the astonishing details. More than land. The estate's true value went far beyond its walls, sprawling gardens, and acres of pristine land. It was more than property. It was a private vault of history, a living archive filled with personal letters, unseen records, and intimate moments carefully preserved across generations. Every room and hallway seemed to echo with whispers of conversations that had quietly shaped the nation, of decisions made in secrecy, and of memories meant to remain hidden. It was a place where history lived in its most private, unfiltered form. Among the treasures were private letters, penned with thoughtfulness and often sealed to remain unread by anyone outside their intended eyes. Personal records documented not just events, but the nuances of life at the very center of a monarchy, hardships, and the small human moments that are rarely captured in public chronicles. These were glimpses into the inner workings of a family whose public image is carefully curated, a record of human decisions that influenced policy, succession, and the daily functioning of one of the world's most storied institutions. It was also a repository of unseen history, moments that the public could never have imagined, brief encounters, private meetings, and exchanges that left ripples through time. Even the simplest notes or entries might carry insight into how the monarchy adapted to crises, how relationships evolved, and how generations of royals navigated their unique responsibilities. Each artifact, each document, each faded signature or scribbled note represented more than nostalgia. It was evidence of the careful stewardship of heritage, of lessons learned and decisions preserved for those deemed capable of understanding their significance. This was not something meant to be converted into a business, a luxury venue, or a tourist attraction. Its value was not financial, nor was its purpose ever intended for public display. What it contained could not be measured in money or publicity. The estate existed for protection, for guardianship, for ensuring that delicate histories, fragile insights, and priceless legacies were kept intact for the future. Its care required vigilance, discretion, and a deep understanding of both the family that had created it and the responsibility of those who inherited it. For Prince Edward, inheriting the estate was far more than taking ownership of land or structures. It was being entrusted with the quiet, immense responsibility of safeguarding centuries of legacy, something that demanded patience, integrity, and respect for the weight of history. Every decision he made would ripple through the echoes of the past, honoring lives lived, choices made, and secrets kept. The estate's significance lay not in spectacle, but in the careful, quiet protection of what truly mattered. The untold story of a nation, preserved in the hands of one who could be trusted to safeguard it. The estate Edward is inheriting holds private letters, personal records, unseen moments of history, and traces of conversations that helped shape a nation. But what does Edward's ownership mean for the future of the monarchy? And why did the Queen choose him? Let's find out. The Queen's final and perfect decision. In the end, the decision was never about favoritism, ambition, or personal reward. It was not about which prince had made the most headlines, who had captured the public eye, or who seemed destined to wield influence in the obvious, visible ways. Queen Elizabeth II's choice was far deeper, far more deliberate. She chose Prince Edward not because of circumstance, but because he embodied something increasingly rare within a world where power and attention often overshadowed judgment: restraint, discretion, and unwavering reliability. Edward was the kind of person who could be trusted with responsibility precisely because he did not crave spectacle. He was not driven by ambition for ambition's sake, nor by the pursuit of wealth, recognition, or applause. He had spent his life quietly observing, learning, and growing without the constant glare that followed his older siblings. Where others might have been tempted to turn an inheritance into a stage for display or profit, Edward's instincts were measured, thoughtful, and careful. He understood that some things are meant to be preserved, not paraded, safeguarded, not sold, protected, not exploited. He would not transform the estate into a business venture, a luxury retreat, or a public attraction. He would not seek headlines or elevate his value for personal gain. Instead, he would honor the trust placed in him, handling every letter, record, room, and corridor with care. Each choice would reflect patience and thoughtfulness, guided by respect for history, legacy, and the weight of generations before him. In Edward, the Queen found someone whose steadiness matched the quiet but enduring significance of the estate itself. With a single, carefully considered move, the Queen ensured that her intentions were beyond dispute. Her legacy, carefully built over decades, shaped through courage, foresight, and unwavering dedication, would remain intact. No one could challenge it, no plans could undermine it, and no ambition could distort it. The inheritance would carry with it the values she cherished: discretion, protection, and loyalty to something greater than oneself. It was not a dramatic gesture, nor one designed to shock the public. Its power lay in subtlety, in the quiet certainty that the right person was now responsible. The estate would not just survive, it would be guarded, nurtured, and respected, exactly as she intended. By placing it in Edward's hands, the Queen preserved not only property, but principle. She entrusted him with history, responsibility, and the kind of authority that demands wisdom rather than showmanship. Ultimately, the decision revealed Queen Elizabeth's unmatched insight into character and consequence. It was not about fame, rank, or appearances, but about stewardship, trust, and foresight. Some choices, unseen by the public, quietly shaped the future in ways far more lasting than any headline or royal announcement. Prince Edward, selected for his calm strength, discretion, and integrity, now carries a unique responsibility. He became the living guardian of a secret legacy, entrusted to remain safe, protected, and untouched. A private treasure meant to endure quietly through generations. What do you make of Camilla's family's reaction to Edward inheriting the Queen's estate? Did they also have a claim to it? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.